Hey guys, so welcome back to another video. ट्रेडिंग इन द जोन ऑडियो बुक पे बात कर रहे हैं वर्ड बाय वर्ड। मार्क डगलस ने ये बुक लिखी है, ट्रेडिंग साइकोलॉजी की बेस्ट बुक। लास्ट चैप्टर 1 to 10 हम ऑलरेडी कवर कर चुके हैं वर्ड बाय वर्ड। आप जाके उसको सुन सकते हैं वाइल ड्राइविंग, सोने से पहले या वाइल वॉकिंग, जैसे भी आपको सही लगे। तो बिना किसी देरी के स्टार्ट करते हैं चैप्टर 11। So, Chapter 11, Thinking Like a Trader. If you ask me to distill trading down to its simplest form, I would say that it is a pattern recognition numbers game. We use market analysis to identify the patterns, define the risk, and determine when to take profits. The trade either works or it doesn't. In any case, we go on to die next trade. It's that simple, but it's certainly not easy. In fact, trading is probably the hardest thing you will ever attempt to be successful at. That's not because it requires intellect, quite the contrary, but because the more you think you know, the less successful you will be. Trading is hard because you have to operate in a state of not know, having to know, even though your analysis may turn out at times to be perfectly correct. To operate in a state of not having to know, you have to properly manage your expectations. To properly manage your expectations, you must realign your mental environment so that you believe without a shadow of a doubt in the five fundamental truths. In this chapter, I am going to give you a trading exercise that will integrate these truths about the market at a functional level in your mental environment. In the process, I will take you through the three stages of development of a trader. The first stage is the mechanical stage. In this stage, you, number one, build the self-trust necessary to operate in an unlimited environment. Number two, learn to flawlessly execute a trading system. Number three, train your mind to think in probabilities. Number four, create a strong, unshakable belief in your consistency as a trader. Once you have completed this first stage, you can then advance to the subjective stage of trading. In this stage, you use anything you have ever learned about the nature of market movement to do whatever it is you want to do. There is a lot of freedom in this stage, so you will have to learn how to monitor your susceptibility to make the kind of trading errors that are the result of any unresolved self-valuation issues I referred to it in the last chapter. The third stage is intuitive stage. Trading intuitively is the most advanced stage of development. It is the trading equivalent of earning a black belt in the martial arts. The difference is that you can't try to be intuitive because intuition is spontaneous. It doesn't come from what we know at a rational level. The rational part of our mind seems to be inherently mistrustful of information received from a source that it doesn't understand. Sensing that something is about to happen is a form of knowing that is very different from anything we know rationally. I have worked with many traders who frequently had a very strong intuitive sense of what was going to happen next, only to be confronted with the rational part of themselves that consistently argued for another course of action. Of course, if they had followed their intuition, they would have experienced a very satisfying outcome. Instead, what they ended up with was usually very unsatisfactory, especially when compared with what they otherwise perceived as possible. The only way I know of that you can try to be intuitive is to work at setting up a state of mind most conducive to receiving and acting on intuitive impulses. The mechanical stage. The mechanical stage of trading is specifically designed to build the kind of trading skills that will virtually compel you to create consistent results. I define consistent results as a steadily rising equity curve with only minor drawdowns that are the natural consequence of edges that didn't work. Other than finding a pattern that puts the odds to your winning trade in your favor, achieving a steadily rising equity curve is a function of systematically eliminating any susceptibility you may have to making the kind of fear, euphoric or self-valuation based trading errors I have described throughout this book. Eliminating the errors and expanding your sense of self-valuation will require the acquisition of skills that are all psychological in nature. The skills are psychological because each one, in its purest form, is simply a belief. Remember that the beliefs we operate out of will determine our state of mind and shape our experiences in a ways that constantly reinforce what we already believe to be true. How truthful a belief is can be determined by how well it serves us, that is, the degree to which it helps us satisfy our objectives. If producing consistent results is your primary objective as a trader, then creating a belief that I am a consistently successful trader will act as a primarily source of energy that will manage your perceptions, interpretations, expectations, and actions in ways that satisfy the belief and consequently the objective. Creating a dominant belief that I am a consistently successful trader requires adherence to several principles of consistent success. Some of these principles will undoubtedly be in the direct conflict with some of the beliefs you have already acquired about trading. If this is the case, then what you have is a classic example of beliefs that are in direct conflict with desire. The energy dynamic here is no different from what it was for the boy who wanted to be like the other children who were not afraid to play with dogs. He desired to express himself in a way that he found at least initially virtually impossible. To satisfy his desire, he had to step into an active process of transformation. His technique was simple. He tried as hard as he could to stay focused on what he was trying to accomplish, and little by little he deactivated the conflicting belief and strengthened the belief that was consistent with his desire. At some point, if that is your desire, then you will have to step into the process of transforming yourself into a consistent winner. When it comes to personal transformation, the most important ingredients are your willingness to change, the clarity of your intent, and the strength of your desire. Ultimately, for this process to work, you must choose consistency over every other reason or justification you have for trading. If all of these ingredients are sufficiently present, then regardless of the internal obstacles you find yourself against, what you desire will eventually prevail. Observe yourself. The first step is the process of creating consistency is to start noticing what you are thinking, saying, and doing. Why? Because everything we think, say, or do as a trader contributes to and therefore reinforces some belief in our mental system. Because the process of becoming consistent is psychological in nature. It shouldn't come as a surprise that you will have to start paying attention to your various psychological processes. The idea is eventually to learn to become an objective observer of your own thoughts, words, and deeds. Your first line of defense against committing a trader error is to catch yourself thinking about it. Of course, the last line of defense is to catch yourself in the act. If you don't commit yourself to becoming an observer to these processes, your realizations will always come after the experience, usually when you are in a state of deep regret and frustration. Observing yourself objectively implies doing it without judging about yourself. This might not be so easy for some of you to considering the harsh judgmental treatment you may have been receiving from other people throughout your life. As a result, one quickly learns to associate any mistake with emotional pain. No one likes to be in a state of emotional pain, so we typically avoid acknowledging what we have learned to define as a mistake for long as possible. Not confronting mistakes in our everyday lives usually doesn't have the same disaster consequences it can have if we avoid confronting our mistakes as a trader. For example, when I'm working with a floor traders, the analogy I use to illustrate how precious a situation they are in is to ask them to imagine themselves walking across a bridge over the Grand Canyon. The width of the bridge is directly related to the number of contracts they trade. So for example, for one contract trader, the bridge is very wide, say 20 feet. A bridge 20 feet wide allows you a great deal of tolerance for error, so you don't have to be inordinately careful or focused on each step you take. Still, if you do happen to stumble and trip over the edge, the drop to the canyon floor is 1 mile. I don't know how many people would walk across the narrow bridge with no guardrails where the ground is a mile down, but my guess is relatively few. Similarly, few people will take the kinds of risk associated with trading on the floor of the futures exchanges. Certainly, a one contract floor trader can do a great deal of damage to himself, not unlike falling off a mile high bridge. But a one contract trader also can give himself a wide tolerance of errors, miscalculations, or unusually violent market moves where he could find himself on the wrong side. On the other hand, one of the biggest floor traders I ever worked with trades for his own account with an average position of 500 treasury bond futures at a time. He often puts on a position of well over 1,000 contracts. A position of 1,000 T-bond contracts amount to 31,500 per tick. Of course, the T-bond futures can be very volatile and can trade several ticks in either direction in a matter of seconds. As the size of traders' position increases, the width of our bridge over the Grand Canyon narrows. In the case of the large bond trader, the bridge has narrowed to the size of a thin wire. Obviously, he has to be extremely well balanced and very focused on each step that he takes. The slightest misstep or gust of wind could cause him to fall off the wire, next stop 1 mile down. Now, when he is in the trading pit, that tiny misstep or slight gust of wind is the equivalent to one distracting thought. That's all. Just a thought or anything else where he allows himself to lose his focus for even a second or two. In that moment of distraction, he could miss his last favorable opportunity to liquidate his position. The next price level with enough volume to take him out of his trade could be several ticks away, either creating a huge loss or forcing him to give a substantial winning trade back to the market. If producing consistent results is a function of eliminating errors, then it is an understatement to say that you will encounter great difficulty in achieving your objective if you can't acknowledge a mistake. Obviously, this is something very few people can do, and it accounts for why there are so few consistent winners. In fact, the tendency not to acknowledge a mistake is so pervasive throughout mankind it could lead one to assume that it's an inherent characteristic of human nature. I do not believe this in the case, nor do I believe we are born with the capacity to ridicule or think less of ourselves for making a mistake, miscalculation, or error. Making mistake is a natural function of living and will continue to be until we reach a point at which number one, all our beliefs are in absolute harmony with our desires, and number two, all our beliefs are structured in such a way that they are completely consistent with what works from the environment's perspective. Obviously, if our beliefs are not consistent with what works from the environment's perspective, the potential for making a mistake is high, if not inevitable. We won't be able to perceive the appropriate set of steps to our objective. Worse, we won't be able to perceive that what we want may not be available or available in the quantity we desire or at the time when we want it. On the other hand, mistakes that are the result of belief that are in conflict with our objectives aren't always apparent or obvious. We know they will act as opposing forces, expressing their versions of the truth on our consciousness, and they can do that in many ways. The most difficult to detect is a distracting thought that causes a momentary lapse in focus or concentration. On the surface, this may not sound significant, but as in the analogy of the bridge over the canyon, when there is lot at stake, even a slightest diminished capacity to stay focused can result in an error of disastrous proportions. This principle applies whether it's trading, sporting events, or computer programming. When our intent is clear and undiminished by an opposing energy, then our capacity to stay focused is greater, and the more likely it is that we will accomplish our objective. Earlier, I defined a winning attitude as a positive expectation of our efforts with an acceptance that whatever results we do get are a perfect reflection of our level of development and what we need to learn to do better. What separates the consistently great athletes and performers from everyone else is their distinct lack of fear of making a mistake. The reason they aren't afraid is that they don't have a reason to think less of themselves when they do make a mistake, meaning they don't have a reservoir of negatively charged energy waiting to well up and pounce on their conscious thought process like a lion waiting for the right moment to pounce on its intended prey. What accounts for this uncommon capacity to quickly move beyond their errors without criticizing themselves? One explanation may be that they grew up with extremely unusual parents, teachers, and coaches who, by their words and examples, taught them to correct their miscalculations and errors with genuine love, affection, and acceptance. I say extremely unusual because many of us grew up with just the opposite experience. We were taught to correct our mistakes or miscalculations with anger, impatience, and a distinct lack of acceptance. Is it possible that for the great athletes, their past positive experiences with respect to mistakes caused them to acquire a belief that mistakes simply point the way to where they need to focus their efforts to grow and improve themselves? With a belief like that, there is no source of negatively charged energy and consequently no source for self-denigrating thoughts. However, the rest of us who did grow up experiencing a plethora of negative reactions to our actions would naturally acquire beliefs about mistakes. Mistakes must be avoided at all costs. There must be something wrong with me if I make a mistake. I must be a screw up, or I must be a bad person if I make a mistake. Remember that every thought, word, and deed reinforces some belief we have about ourselves. If by repeated negative self criticism we acquire a belief that we are screw ups, that belief we will find a way to express itself in our thoughts, causing us to become distracted and to screw up on our words, causing us to say things about ourselves or about others that reflect our belief and our actions, causing us to behave in ways that are overtly self-sabotaging. If you are going to become a consistent winner, mistakes can't exist in the kind of negatively charged context in which they are held by most people. You have to be able to monitor yourself in some degree, and that will difficult to do if you have the potential to experience emotional pain if and when you find yourself in the process of making an error. If this potential exists, you have two choices. Number one, you can work on acquiring a new set of positively charged beliefs about what it means to make a mistake, along with deactivating any negatively charged beliefs that would argue otherwise or cause you to think less of yourself for making a mistake. Number two, if you find this first choice undesirable, you can compensate for the potential to make errors by the way you set up your trading regime. This means that if you're going to trade and not monitor yourself, but at the same time you desire consistent results, then trading exclusively from the mechanical stage will resolve the dilemma. Otherwise, learning how to monitor yourself is a relatively simple process once you have rid yourself of negatively charged energy associated with mistakes. In fact, it's easy. All you have to do is decide why you want to monitor yourself, which means you first need to have a clear purpose in mind. When you are clear about your purpose, simply start directing your attention to what you think, say, or do. If and when you notice that you are not focused on your objective or on the incremental steps to accomplish your objective, choose to redirect your thoughts, words, or actions in a way that is consistent with what you are trying to accomplish. Keep redirecting as often as necessary. The more willfully you engage in this process, especially if you can do it with some degree of conviction, the faster you will create a mental framework free to function in a way that is consistent with your objectives without any resistance from conflicting beliefs. The role of self-discipline. I call the process I just described self-discipline. I define self-discipline as a mental technique to redirect our focus of attention to the object of our goal or desire when that goal or desire conflicts with some other component of our mental environment. The first thing you should notice about the definition is that self-discipline is a technique to create a new mental framework. It is not a personality trait. People aren't born with self-discipline. In fact, when you consider how I define it, being born with discipline isn't even possible. However, as a technique to be used in the process of personal transformation, anybody can choose to use self-discipline. Here is an example from my life that illustrates the underlying dynamics of how the technique works. In 1978, I decided that I wanted to become a runner. I don't exactly remember what my underlying motivation was, except that I had spent the previous 8 years in a very inactive lifestyle. I wasn't involved with any sports or hobbies unless you call watching television a hobby. Previously, in both high school and at least part of college, I was very active in sports, especially ice hockey. However, coming out of college, my life was unfolding in the way that was very different from what I had expected. It was not to my liking, but at the time I felt powerless to do anything about it. This led to a period of inactivity, which is a nice way of saying that I was severely depressed. Again, I am not sure what prompted me to suddenly want to become a runner. I do, however, remember the motivation was very strong. So I went out and bought myself some running shoes, put them on, and went on to run. The first thing I discovered was that I couldn't do it. I didn't have the physical stamina to run more than 50 or 60 yards. This was very surprising. I didn't realize, nor would I have ever believed, that I was so out of shape that I couldn't run even 100 yards. This realization was so disheartening that I didn't attempt to run again for 2 or 3 weeks. The next time out, I still couldn't run more than 50 or 60 yards. I tried again the next day with, of course, the same result. I became so discouraged with about my deteriorated physical condition that I didn't run again for another 4 months. Now it's the spring of 1979. I am once again determined to become a runner, but at the same time very frustrated with my lack of progress. As I was contemplating my dilemma, it occurred to me that one of my problems was that I didn't have a goal to work towards. Saying that I wanted to be a runner was great, but what did that mean? I really didn't know. It was too vague and abstract. I had to have more something tangible to work towards. So I decided that I wanted to able to run 5 miles by the end of the summer. 5 miles seemed insurmountable at the time, but thinking that I might be able to do it generated a lot of enthusiasm. This increased level of enthusiasm gave me enough impetus to run 4 times that week. At the end of this first week, I was really surprised to discover even a little bit of exercise improved my stamina and ability to run a little farther each time. This created even more enthusiasm, so I went out and bought a stopwatch and blank book to be used as a running diary. I set up a 2 mile course and marked off each quarter mile. In the diary, I entered the date, my distance, my time, and how I felt physically each time I ran. Now, I thought I was well on my way to the 5 miles until I literally ran into my next set of problems. The biggest were the conflicting and distracting thoughts that flooded my consciousness every time I decided I wanted to go out and run. I was amazed at the number of the reasons I found for not doing it. It's hot or cold outside. It looks like it's going to rain. I'm still a little tired from the last time I ran. Nobody else I know is doing this. Or the most prevalent, I will go as soon as this TV program is over. I didn't know any other way to deal with this conflicting mental energy except for redirect my conscious attention on what I was trying to accomplish. I really wanted to get to 5 miles by the end of the summer. I found that sometimes my desire was stronger than the conflict. As a result, I managed to get my running shoes on, actually step outside and start running. However, more times than not, my conflicting and distracting thoughts caused me to stay put. In fact, in the beginning stages, I estimated that two-thirds of the time I was unable to pass the conflicting energy. The next problem I encountered was that when I started approaching the point where I was able to run 1 mile, I was so thrilled with myself that it occurred to me I was going to need an additional mechanism to get me to the 5 miles. I reasoned that once I got to the point where I could run 2 or maybe 3 miles, I would be so overwhelmingly pleased with myself that I wouldn't feel any need to fulfill my 5 mile objective. So I made a rule for myself. You call it the 5 mile rule. If I manage to get my running shoes on and get outside in spite of all the conflicting thoughts trying to talk me out of it, I committed myself to running at least one step farther than the last time I ran. It was certainly alright if I ran more than one step further, but it couldn't be less than one step, no matter what. As it turns out, I never break this rule, and by the end of the summer, I made it to 5 miles. But then, something really interesting and completely unanticipated happened before I got there. As I got closer to fulfilling my 5 mile objective, little by little, the conflicting thoughts began to dissipate. Eventually, they didn't exist at all. At that point, I found that if I wanted to run, I was completely free to do so without any mental resistance, conflict, or competing thoughts. Given what a struggle it had been, I was amazed. The result, I went on to run on a very regular basis for the next 16 years. For those of you who may be interested, I don't run so much now because 5 years ago I decided to start playing ice hockey again. Hockey is an extremely strenuous sport. Sometimes I play as many as 4 times a week. Considering my age and the level of exertion the sport requires, it usually takes me a day or two to recover, which doesn't leave much room for running anymore. Now, if you take these experiences and put them into context of what we now understand about the nature of beliefs, there are a number of observations we can make. Number 1. Initially, my desire to be a runner had no foundation of support in my mental system. In other words, there was no other source of energy consistent with my desire. Number 2, I actually had to do something to create that support, to create a belief that I am a runner required that I create a series of experiences consistent with the new belief. Remember that everything we think, say, or do contribute energy to some belief in our mental system. Each time I experienced a conflicting thought and was able to successfully refocus on my objective with enough conviction to get me into my running shoes and out the door, I added energy to the belief that I am a runner. And just as important, I inadvertently drew energy away from all the beliefs that would argue otherwise. I say inadvertently because there are various techniques specifically designed to identify and deactivate conflicting beliefs, but at that time in my life I didn't understand the underlying dynamics of the process of transformation I was going through. So it wouldn't have occurred to me to avail myself of such techniques. Number 3. Now I can effortlessly express myself as a runner because I am a runner. That energized concept is now a functioning part of my identity. When I first started out, I happened to have a number of conflicting beliefs about running. Now I don't need self discipline. When our beliefs are completely aligned with our goals or desires, there is no source of conflicting energy. If there is no source of conflicting energy, then there is no source of distracting thoughts, excuses, rationalizations, justifications, or mistakes. Number 4. Beliefs can be changed, and if it's possible to change one belief, then it's possible to change any belief. If you understand that you really aren't changing them, yet you are only transferring energy from one concept to another. Therefore, two completely contradictory beliefs can exist in your mental system side by side. But if you have drawn the energy out of one belief and completely energized the other, no contradiction exists, and from a functional perspective, only the belief that the energy will have the capacity to act as a force on your state of mind, on your perception and the interpretation of information and your behavior. Now, the sole purpose of trading mechanically is to transform yourself into a consistently successful trader. If there is anything in your mental environment that's in conflict with the principles of creating the belief that I am a consistently successful trader, then you will need to employ the technique of self-discipline to integrate these principles as a dominant functioning part of your identity. Once the principles become who you are, you will no longer need self-discipline because the process of being consistent will become effortlessly. Remember that consistency is not the same as the ability to put on a winning trade, or even a string of winning trades for that matter, because putting on a winning trade requires absolutely no skill. All you have to do is guess correctly, which is no different than guessing the outcome of a coin toss. Whereas consistency is a state of mind that once achieved won't allow you to be any other way. You won't have to try to be consistent because it will be a natural function of your identity. In fact, if you have to try, it's an indication that you haven't completely integrated the principles of consistent success as a dominant unconflicted beliefs. For example, predefining your risk is a step in the process of being consistent. If it takes any special effort to predefine your risk, if you have to consciously remind yourself to do it, if you experience any conflicting thoughts, or if you find yourself in a trade where you haven't predefined your risk, then this principle is not a dominant functioning part of your identity. It isn't who you are. If it were, it wouldn't even occur to you not to predefine your risk. If and when all the sources of conflict have been deactivated, there is no longer a potential for you to be any other way. What was once a struggle will become virtually effortless. At that point, it may seem to be other people that you are so disciplined, but the reality is that you aren't disciplined at all. You are just simply functioning from a different set of beliefs that compel you to behave in a way that is consistent with your desires, goals, or objectives. Creating a belief in consistency. Creating a belief that I am a consistent winner is the primary objective, but like my intention to become a runner is too broad and abstract to implement without breaking it down into a step by step process. So what I am going to do is break this belief down into its smallest definable parts and then guide you a plan to integrate each part as a dominant belief. The following sub-beliefs are the building of thinking like a trader that provide the underlying structure of what it means to be a consistent winner. I am a consistent winner because I objectively identify my edges. I predefine the risk of every trade. I completely accept risk, or I am willing to let go of the trade. I act on my edges without reservation or hesitation. I pay myself as the market makes money available to me. I continually monitor my susceptibility of making errors. I understand the absolute necessity of these principles of consistent success and therefore I never violate them. These beliefs are the 7 principles of consistency. To integrate these principles into your mental system at a functional level requires that you purposely create a series of experiences that are consistent with them. This is no different from the boy who wanted to play with dogs or might desire to be a runner. Before he could play with a dog, the boy first had to make several attempts just to get close to one. Eventually, as the balance of energy in his mental system shifted, he could play with dogs without any internal resistance. To become a runner, I had to create the experience of running in spite of everything inside me that argued otherwise. Eventually, as the energy shifted more and more in favor of this new definition of myself, running became a natural expression of my identity. Obviously, what we are trying to accomplish here is far more complex than becoming a runner or petting a dog, but the underlying dynamics of the process are identical. We'll start with specific objective. The first principle of consistency is the belief. I objectively identify my edges. The key word here is objectively. Being objective means there is no potential to define, interpret, and therefore perceive any market information from either a painful or euphoric perspective. The way to be objective is to operate out of beliefs that keep your expectations neutral and to always take the unknown forces into consideration. Remember, you have to specifically train your mind to be objective and to stay focused in the now moment opportunity flow. Our minds are not naturally wired to think this way, so to be an objective observer, you have to learn to think from the market's perspective. From the market's perspective, there are always unknown forces waiting to act on a price movement. Therefore, from the market's perspective, every moment is truly unique. Even though the moment may look, sound, or feel exactly the same as some moment locked away in your memory bank. The instant you either decide or assume you know what's going to happen next, you will automatically expect to be right. However, what you know, at least at the rational level of thinking, can only take into consideration your unique past, which may not have any relationship to what is actually happening from the market's perspective. At that point, any market information that is not consistent with your expectation has the potential to be defined and interpreted as painful. To avoid experiencing the pain, your mind will automatically compensate with both conscious and subconscious pain avoidance mechanisms for any difference between what you expect and the what market is offering. What you will experience is commonly referred to as an illusion. In a state of illusion, you are neither objective nor connected to the now moment opportunity flow. Instead, you become susceptible to committing all the typical trading errors. The 5 fundamental truths about the market will keep you expectations neutral, focus your mind in the now moment opportunity flow, and therefore eliminate your potential to commit these errors. When you stop making trading errors, you will begin trusting yourself. As your sense of self trust increases, so will your sense of self confidence. The greater your confidence, the easier it will be to execute your trades. The five truths will also create a state of mind in which you will genuinely accept the risk of trading. When you genuinely accept the risk, you will be at peace with any outcome. When you are at peace with any outcome, you will experience a carefree, objective state of mind where you make yourself available to perceive and act upon whatever the market is offering you at any given now moment. The first objective is to integrate as a dominant belief. I objectively identify my edges. The challenge now is, how do you get there? How do you transform yourself into a person who can consistently think in the market's perspective? The process of transformation starts with your desire and your willingness to refocus on the object of your desire. Desire is a force. It does not have to coincide or agree with anything that you currently believe to be true about the nature of trading. A clear desire aimed squarely at a specific objective is a very powerful tool. You can use the force of your desire to create an entirely new version or dimension to your identity, shift energy between two or more conflicting concepts, or change the context or polarity of your memories from negative to positive. Sure you are familiar with saying make up your mind. The implication of making up your mind is that we decide exactly what we desire with so much clarity and with so much conviction that literally nothing stands in your way, either internally or externally. If there is enough force behind our resolve, it's possible to experience a major shift in our mental structure virtually instantaneously. Deactivating internal conflicts is not a function of time, it's a function focused desire. Otherwise, in the absence of extreme clarity and conviction, the technique of self discipline over time will do the job quite nicely. To get there, you must make up your mind with as much conviction and clarity as possible that more than anything else, you desire consistency from your trading. This is necessary because if you are like most traders, you are going to be up against some very formidable conflicting forces. For example, if you have been trading to get high from the euphoria of catching a big move, to impress your family and friends, to be a hero, to fulfill an addiction to random rewards, to be right about your predictions, or for any other reason that has nothing to do with being consistent, then you will find the forces of these other motivation will not act as an obstacle, making the trading exercise I am about to give you very difficult. But it could very well be strong enough even to keep you from doing the exercise at all. Remember the boy who had no desire to be like the other children and interact with the dogs. In essence, he decided to live with the active contradictions between his minimally charged positive belief that not all dogs are dangerous and his core negatively charged belief that all dogs are dangerous. He had the ability to perceive friendly dogs, but at the same time found it impossible to interact with them unless he desires to change it. The imbalance of energy between these two beliefs will stay exactly as it is for his entire life. To even start this process, you have to want consistency so much that you would be willing to give up all other reasons, motivations, or agendas you have for trading that aren't consistent with the process of integrating the belief that create consistency. A clear intense desire is an absolute prerequisite if you're going to make this process work for you.